I was still in my wedding dress when my phone buzzed with a live stream notification. My sister's face filled the screen, smiling as she walked strangers through my house, pointing out the kitchen I designed, the bedroom where my husband and I planned our future. "It'll sell fast," she laughed, stepping over boxes of my life. My stomach twisted, my bouquet slipped from my hands. In 20 minutes, she'd auctioned off memories I hadn't even unpacked. But this wasn't just about the house. I didn't know it yet, but the papers she was waving were forged, and the real story was far uglier. The phone rang at 2 a.m., its shrill tone slicing through the thin veil of sleep. My sister's voice came fast, urgent, breathless. "Mom's in the hospital. It's bad. You need to come now." I didn't ask questions. I threw on yesterday's jeans, grabbed my keys, and was in the car before I even remembered to put on socks. The rain fell hard, streaking the windshield in silver ribbons, the wipers working overtime as my headlights carved a path through the dark. Every red light felt like betrayal. It wasn't the first time I'd gotten a call like this. My family had a way of making everything sound like life and death, and somewhere along the way, I stopped questioning the urgency. I had been conditioned for years, trained really, to respond without hesitation. In our family, loyalty wasn't a virtue, it was currency. You proved your worth by showing up, by sacrificing whatever you were doing, whoever you were with, for the sake of us. The roots of it went deep. I remembered being 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, listening to my mother whisper about how we have to stick together because no one else will help us. Holidays were explosions of warmth, lavish meals, surprise gifts, laughter so loud you forgot the silences that followed, because they always followed. After the love came the withdrawal, the cold shoulder, the reminder that joy was conditional. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, heart pounding, and jogged through the sliding doors. The fluorescent lights felt too bright after the rain-soaked drive. I found Mom sitting up in bed, pale but alert, sipping from a paper cup. My sister Vanessa was there, arms crossed, phone in hand, scrolling. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by confusion. "What happened?" I asked. "She fainted," Vanessa said, barely looking up. Blood pressure dropped. I took Mom's hand, feeling its familiar thinness, the cool skin over tendons and veins. She squeezed my fingers, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm fine now. It was just a scare." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I didn't know that this hospital trip was less about Mom's health and more about something else entirely. If I had known the truth, I might not have driven home that night at all. Looking back, the warning signs had been there for years. I'd given Vanessa the password to my Netflix account, then my Amazon Prime, and eventually, though I told myself it was temporary, my online banking login so she could help pay Mom's bills. She'd suggested we put the deed to my house in the family trust for tax purposes. I signed a temporary power of attorney once so she could handle a contractor while I was away. Somewhere along the way, I noticed I wasn't in the main family group chat anymore. When I asked, she laughed it off. "We just talk about boring stuff, every night." There was the time I missed out on a big contract at work because Vanessa had offered to forward me an urgent client email while I was traveling. She forgot, and by the time I saw it, the deadline had passed. She apologized over coffee, brushing it away with a joke about how bad she was with technology. I told myself it was just an accident. That night in the hospital, after the doctor cleared Mom to go home, I stayed behind while Vanessa went to get the car. I sat in the visitor's chair, my jacket draped over my knees, and Mom's head resting against my shoulder. The beeping monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses in the hallway felt almost comforting. I breathed in the faint scent of her lavender lotion, the one she'd used since I was a kid. For a few minutes there was no tension, no suspicion, just the fragile peace of being together. I told her I'd sleep on the couch at her place in case she needed anything. She squeezed my hand again, whispering, "You've always been the good one." The words warmed me, even as some quieter part of me wondered why being the good one always seemed to cost me more than anyone else. When Vanessa returned, she was all smiles, chatting about the weather and how the rain had flooded the street outside. She slid an arm under Mom's and helped her into the wheelchair, her eyes catching mine for just a moment, calm, unreadable. We left together, driving in silence, the windshield wipers keeping time. If I had been paying closer attention, I might have noticed the little things. The way Vanessa avoided my gaze, the way her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she silenced it without looking. But I was too tired, too relieved, and too wrapped up in the familiar role I'd been playing my whole life. The fixer, the helper, the one who always came when called. I didn't know then that the real storm was already gathering. We were halfway home from the airport, my husband's tux still hanging in the back seat, and my wedding dress folded carefully in its garment bag, when my phone lit up with a notification. It was from a mutual acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, tagging me in a live stream. I tapped it without thinking. The video opened to my sister Vanessa, smiling wide, her voice chipper, as she walked a group of strangers through my house. "This is the living room," she said, gesturing toward the sofa where I had spent months saving for each piece. "It gets the morning light, perfect for coffee." Behind her, people wandered freely, opening drawers, running their hands along the banister. My stomach tightened, but I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she was helping a friend sell their home and it just looked like mine. Then the camera panned, and there it was, the art print my late father had given me for my college graduation. My pulse roared in my ears. She had no right to even touch that, let alone parade it in front of strangers. As I kept watching, I realized it wasn't just the print. The carved wooden jewelry box from my grandmother's attic was gone. The framed wedding photo we took on the beach 2 days earlier was nowhere to be seen. Some of the shelves were half empty, as if the sale had started before the tour. I couldn't look away. The video felt like an out-of-body experience, seeing my life disassembled, my memories offered up like items at a yard sale. And then, in the corner of the screen, I saw him. A tall figure leaning against the doorway, face partially shadowed. Even through the grainy video, I knew that stance, that lazy way of crossing his arms. It was my best friend from high school, Jonah. We hadn't spoken in years, and the last I'd heard, he lived 3 states away. What was he doing in my house with my sister? By the time we pulled into our driveway, my hands were shaking. The street outside was empty, but I couldn't shake the image of those strangers pacing through my rooms. My husband reached for my hand, his voice low. "We'll figure it out." But I could tell from the set of his jaw that he was as stunned as I was. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I moved on autopilot. I pulled out my laptop, opened the livestream link, and downloaded every second before it could disappear. Then I logged into the cloud storage for our home security cameras. Vanessa had thought ahead. Several feeds were mysteriously offline, but not all of them. I found 2 clips from the day before, showing her unlocking the door with a key I'd never given her and leading people inside. Jonah appeared in both, carrying a clipboard. The betrayal stung, but it also woke something in me. I couldn't afford to collapse. I needed proof, and I needed it before they covered their tracks. I started cataloging, timestamps from the video, still frames of each person present, close-ups of missing items. I took screenshots of my text history with Vanessa, when I'd last mentioned the house, when she'd last been inside. It felt mechanical, methodical, the way I used to approach tough projects at work. But underneath, there was a raw ache. Every familiar object in those videos was a reminder of how quickly trust could be weaponized. Later, when the adrenaline ebbed, I wandered into the living room. The air felt different, emptier, like the house itself had been hollowed out. My eyes went to the wall where our wedding photo had hung for exactly 3 days. Just a pale rectangle remained, the dust around it undisturbed. I sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, and let the quiet stretch around me. This wasn't just theft. It was a violation so personal it made me feel like a stranger in my own home. Through the haze, I thought about Jonah. We'd been inseparable once. Late-night talks, shared secrets. A friendship I'd believed was unshakable. The idea that he'd walked through my door, past every piece of my life, and helped Vanessa strip it bare was almost harder to face than my sister's betrayal. I stayed there until the light shifted, until the room was wrapped in the shadows of late afternoon. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should stop looking into this." No name, no explanation, just those words. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a target. And if they wanted me to stop digging, it meant there was something worth finding. The night after the live stream, I set up my laptop at the kitchen table and started treating the situation like a crime scene. Every link, every screenshot, every stray message. They were all pieces of evidence now. I began with the obvious, the livestream file, downloaded in multiple formats, backed up to an external hard drive. Then I pulled still images, zooming in on faces, hands, even the reflections in picture frames to catch details. From there, I moved to the digital footprint. The house listing that had popped up online, now mysteriously removed, was still accessible through the Wayback Machine. I captured every cached version, time-stamped and labeled. Google Takeout gave me a massive file of my own email archives, and buried in there, I found an email forwarded to a real estate agency from an address I didn't recognize, using my name as the sender. I needed to confirm what they were using to claim authority. That's when I got hold of a scanned power of attorney that supposedly allowed Vanessa to act on my behalf. My heart stopped as I opened the PDF. It wasn't just my signature at the bottom. It was my father's, listed as a witness. My father, who had been dead for 3 years. I stared at the signature, the loop of the R, the sharp slant of the M in his last name. It was uncanny, almost perfect, and yet there was something off, too uniform, like it had been copied and pasted from another document. I checked the metadata, and sure enough, the creation date was months after his death. My chest tightened. This wasn't just petty theft anymore. This was fraud with a level of premeditation. I hadn't wanted to believe my own sister capable of. That signature was the key to unlocking the biggest family secret I'd ever stumble into. But I didn't know that yet. I realized I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to a real estate attorney I'd met through a client years ago. His first advice was simple: document everything, assume nothing. Next, I knocked on the door of my neighbor, Mrs. Aldridge, who'd lived on the street for 40 years. She'd seen people coming and going the day of the live stream and agreed to write a statement, even offering the security footage from her porch camera. Online, I found a private group dedicated to exposing real estate scams. I posted a vague version of my story, omitting names, and within hours, several people reached out with advice: how to trace document origins, how to check if property transfer papers had been filed, how to spot forged notarizations. Then came the message on Signal. It was from my cousin, Leah. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but she claimed she was furious about what Vanessa was doing and wanted to help. She sent me high-resolution photos of the original deed to my house, complete with the notarization page. My heart pounded. This was gold. She urged me to keep her involvement secret, saying she didn't want to cause more family drama. For a few days, I believed her. I cataloged the documents she sent, compared them to the ones Vanessa had filed, noted every inconsistency. But something didn't sit right. Leah kept asking what I planned to do next, who I was working with, what the attorney had said. It felt less like concern and more like reconnaissance. The truth would come later. Leah had been feeding my updates straight back to Vanessa, playing both sides to see who would come out on top. At the time, I just thought I'd finally found an ally. One evening, after hours of scanning and filing, I needed air. I stepped onto the front porch where Mrs. Aldridge sat in her usual wicker chair, a mug of tea in her hands. She asked how the battle was going, and I gave her the sanitized version. She listened without interrupting, then said something that lodged in my mind. A house isn't just brick and wood, dear. It's the part of you you can't pack into a box. That's what they're really trying to take. Her words slowed me down. For weeks, I'd been in constant motion, chasing leads, tracking timelines. That night, I let myself sit in the quiet, the hum of crickets around us, and feel the weight of what was at stake. Not just the walls and furniture, but the sense of safety, the trust that home was mine. Inside, my laptop screen glowed with the open file of my father's forged signature. Somewhere in that looped R and sharp M was the proof I needed to dismantle Vanessa's scheme. I just had to figure out where it had come from and why. I chose my battleground carefully. Not a courtroom, not a faceless email, but the dining room of my mother's house, where our family had celebrated every Thanksgiving and fought through every Christmas. Vanessa had called for a family discussion to clear the air. I decided to bring the air-clearing tools. When everyone was seated, siblings, cousins, 2 aunts, and my mother, at the head of the table, I set up my laptop and connected it to the TV mounted on the wall. "I have something to show you," I began, keeping my voice even. The first slide appeared, a still from the live stream, Vanessa front and center, arms wide as she introduced my living room to strangers. I didn't narrate. I let the images speak. The jewelry box missing from the shelf. The wedding photo vanished from the wall. The strangers opening my drawers. Then came the timestamps from the security cameras. the side-by-side comparison of the original deed and the forged power of attorney, complete with my father's impossible signature. Murmurs rippled through the room. I clicked to the next slide. Bank statements showing transfers from my account to a staging company Vanessa had hired. Then the cached property listing from the Wayback Machine, complete with her contact info as the seller's representative. Before I could continue, Uncle David cleared his throat. "She did the same thing to me," he said quietly. All eyes turned to him. He told the room about a fishing cabin he'd owned, how Vanessa had helped with the paperwork to refinance it and somehow ended up with her name on the title. He hadn't spoken of it before, ashamed he'd been fooled. His voice shook, but the relief in his face was unmistakable. For a moment, the room felt united, everyone leaning toward the truth. I thought maybe this was it, the turning point. But then, from the far end of the table, slow applause. 1, 2, 3 deliberate claps. I turned, and there he was. A man in a dark suit, briefcase at his side. "I'm Aaron Mills," he said smoothly, "counsel for Vanessa." He placed a folder on the table and slid it toward me. "This is the current agreement, signed by all relevant parties, transferring the property to my client." I opened it. The paper was still warm from the printer. The signature that claimed to be mine was a near-perfect replica, but I'd never touched that pen, never seen that page. The mood shifted. Vanessa sat straighter, eyes bright as if the tide had turned. She said, "Rachel's been absent for months, focusing on her new life. I had to make decisions for Mom's well-being." That was her opening. I was ready for it. I pulled a separate folder from my bag and spread the contents on the table. PDF printouts of every bank transfer I'd made to cover Mom's medical expenses over the last year. Receipts from the hospital, even notes from the nurses, thanking me for arranging equipment deliveries. "She says I abandoned Mom," I told the room, "but these are the facts." My voice stayed steady, not because I wasn't angry, but because anger was what she wanted to see. Aaron adjusted his tie, but didn't speak. Vanessa's gaze darted to the paperwork, then back to the faces around the table. The murmurs started again, this time louder, sharper. I leaned back, letting the noise swell without me. The point wasn't to win them over in this moment. It was to plant seeds they couldn't ignore later. The meeting wound down with no official resolution. People left in clusters, whispering. Vanessa avoided my eyes as she gathered her things. Aaron closed his briefcase and nodded at me once before following her out. When the door shut, I stayed in my chair, my hands flat on the table. My mother sat across from me, her expression unreadable. "You've been keeping all this inside," she said softly. I didn't answer. Later, at home, I made tea. The kitchen was quiet, the steam curling from the mug into the air. I stood there, breathing it in, forcing my shoulders to relax. The fight wasn't over, but I couldn't let adrenaline make my decisions. The next move would require precision, not fury. The morning after the family meeting, my attorney filed an emergency motion to halt any transfer of the property. The court order came through within hours, stamped and signed, and was delivered directly to the county clerk's office. Any attempt to change the deed now would trigger legal consequences. That same afternoon, 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit called. They had been briefed on the forged power of attorney and the suspicious property listing. The term they used was fraudulent conveyance, and they were taking it seriously. I handed over every piece of evidence I'd collected: videos, documents, emails, even the metadata from the forged files. Days later, one of the detectives called back. "There's something else," he said. My stomach nodded. He explained that while running a background check on Vanessa, they discovered several active loan applications in my name. Not mortgages, not credit cards, predatory personal loans, the kind with interest rates that doubled every month. The total requested exceeded $200,000. If those loans had been approved, I would have woken up one morning to a mountain of debt I'd never agreed to. "We've frozen the applications for now," the detective assured me, "but you need to monitor your accounts closely." I sat at my desk, the reality of it sinking in. This wasn't just about the house anymore. Vanessa had been ready to dismantle my entire financial life. The investigation moved quickly after that. The forged signature from my late father became the linchpin. It tied directly to documents Vanessa had used both for the house and for the loan applications. Combined with testimony from Uncle David and Mrs. Aldridge's porch footage, the case against her was airtight. 3 weeks later, my attorney called. "We've reached a settlement offer," he said. "She signs the house back to you, withdraws all loan applications, and issues a public apology, or we proceed with criminal charges." Vanessa agreed. The day she came to sign the reversal documents, she wouldn't look at me. The county recorder stamped my name back onto the deed. That night, I slept for the first time in months without waking in a sweat. The public apology came via a short statement emailed to our extended family and posted on a private group page. It was clinical, almost cold. She admitted to errors in judgment and overstepping authority. I didn't need warmth from her. I just needed the truth on record. When the dust began to settle, I stood outside my front door with a paintbrush in hand. The wood had been chipped from years of weather and neglect. I dipped the brush into a deep, rich blue and swept it across the surface, the scent of fresh paint mingling with the late afternoon air. Sunlight poured across my face as I worked, and for a moment, the ache in my chest eased. I wasn't celebrating, I was reclaiming. Inside, there was still cleaning to do, repairs to make, trust to rebuild, with myself more than anyone else, but the house felt mine again. A week later, a courier delivered a large envelope from the county clerk's office containing all the documents Vanessa had been forced to return. I sat at the dining table and began sorting through them. Property deeds, bank statements, letters from lawyers. Near the bottom of the stack, I found something I'd never seen before: a will. It was dated 15 years ago and bore my father's unmistakable, genuine signature. According to the will, he had left me a parcel of land in the northern part of the state, a place I barely remembered visiting as a child. The property had never been mentioned in any family conversation, and it wasn't listed in any estate filings after his death. I stared at the faded paper, my pulse quickening. How long had this been hidden, and by whom? The first step in rebuilding my life was setting boundaries so firm they might as well have been carved in stone. I started with the legal ones, changing my will, my power of attorney, and every account where my name could be used without my consent. I moved essential documents into a safety deposit box in another state, far from the reach of anyone who might try to borrow them. Then came the digital purge. I changed every password I had, turned on two-factor authentication, and locked down my social media. I deleted old email accounts I no longer used. Finally, I opened the family group chat, scrolled past months of hollow greetings and passive-aggressive remarks, and pressed Leave Conversation. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure? I smiled as I tapped Yes. The silence that followed felt like fresh air after a storm. For the first time in years, my phone didn't feel like a leash. I told myself I was free, but freedom is strange when you've been conditioned to always answer the call. The absence of noise takes getting used to. I learned to fill it with things I chose, mornings in the garden, evenings with a book instead of defending myself in endless text threads. But there was still the matter of the land my father had left me. A week after finding the will, I drove upstate to see it. The road wound through hills lined with pine, opening onto a quiet valley. The property was modest, just a small clearing by a river, with an old cabin whose porch sagged at one corner. It was untouched, almost forgotten, but as I walked the grounds, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. The kind that wasn't tied to anyone else's approval or expectations. I decided to turn it into a small homestay, not a sprawling resort, not a business meant to impress anyone. Just a place travelers could rest and feel at home. I spent the next months making the cabins safe and welcoming. I learned how to patch the roof, sand floorboards, and paint walls until the rooms glowed with warmth. There was a rhythm to the work, mornings filled with the hum of tools, afternoons with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of the river outside. I kept the furniture simple, pieces I built or restored myself. On one wall, I hung the restored beach wedding photo, not as a monument to loss, but as proof that I could carry beauty forward. The first guests arrived in late spring, a couple passing through on their way to the mountains. They left a handwritten note in the guest book. Thank you for creating this peaceful place. We needed it more than we knew. Reading it, I realized that was exactly how I'd felt stepping onto this land for the first time. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the river, watching the light shift across the valley. The quiet was no longer an empty space I feared. It was a companion. One night, as I locked up the cabin, I caught sight of myself in the window. Not the wary, hunted woman who had walked out of that family meeting months ago, but someone grounded, steady, someone who knew exactly where her lines were drawn and would never let them be crossed again. Running the homestay became more than a livelihood. It was a statement. I could build something lasting without sacrificing myself to keep it. Guests came and went, each leaving a little warmth behind, and I found that their presence filled the space without crowding it. By midsummer, the property was thriving. Bookings were steady, the garden bloomed, and I'd started keeping bees along the far edge of the field. The work was constant, but it was mine. Every decision, every improvement, every ounce of effort belonged to me. Sometimes, when I checked the mailbox, I'd find letters from people who had read about my story in a local news piece. Strangers wrote to say they'd cut off toxic relatives, or that they were finally taking steps to protect their assets. It was humbling to know my survival had become someone else's blueprint. One morning, just before dawn, I stepped out onto the balcony of the cabin. The air was cool, the kind that hinted at autumn but still carried summer's warmth. The horizon blushed with the first streaks of sunrise, light spilling over the hills and across the river. I rested my hands on the railing and let the moment stretch, unhurried. In that stillness, the truth settled in. The house I'd fought for, the land my father had left me, the boundaries I'd built, they weren't the sum of what I'd gained. The real victory was knowing I didn't need anyone's permission to keep them. The thought rose in me, clear and certain. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you never really had anything. And now I have it all.